Today we'll go through 4 interesting cases where astronauts or cosmonauts saw UFOs, 2 American and 2 Russian.
Chris Lehto, welcome to LehtoFiles.
Okay, the first one is from astronaut James McDivitt on Gemini 4 in June 1965. McDivitt saw, filmed, and photographed an object which approached the Gemini 4 capsule in which they were orbiting Earth. The mission was from 3 to 7 June 1965. The object approached the capsule in which they were orbiting the Earth, passing over Hawaii. He said it had a very definite shape, a cylindrical object. It was white. It had a long arm that stuck out on the side. Okay, this is the full report from UFOevidence.org. Here's what Major James McDivitt has repeated many times. I was flying with Ed White. He was sleeping at the time, so I don't have anybody to verify my story. We were drifting in space with the control engines shut down and all the instrumentation off, when suddenly an object appeared in the window. It had a very definite shape, a cylindrical object. It was white. It had a long arm that stuck out on the side. I don't know whether it was a very small object up close or a very large object a long ways away. There was nothing to judge by. I really don't know how big it was. We had 2 cameras that were just floating in the spacecraft at the time, so I grabbed one and took a picture of the object, and grabbed the other and took a picture. Then I turned on the rocket control systems because I was afraid we might hit it. At the time we were drifting. Without checking, I have no idea which way we were going, but as we drifted up a little further, the sun shone on the window of the spacecraft. The windshield was dirty, just like in an automobile, you can't see through it. So I had the rocket control engines going again and moved the spacecraft so that the window was in darkness again. The object was gone. I called down later and told them what happened, and they went back and checked their records of other space debris that was flying around, but we were never able to identify what it could have been. The film was sent back to NASA and reviewed by some NASA film technicians. One of them selected what he thought was what we talked about, at least before I had a chance to review it. It was not the picture. It was a picture of a sun reflection on the window. The Connor report actually did look at this case, and it wrote, visual sightings made by the astronauts while in orbit, in the judgment of the writer, have not been adequately explained. They said in the Connor report there were 3 visual sightings made by astronauts while in orbit. These are Gemini 4, astronaut McDivitt, observation of a cylindrical object with a protuberance. Gemini 4, astronaut McDivitt, observation of a moving bright light at a higher level than the Gemini spacecraft. And the third one's Gemini 7, astronaut Borman saw what he described as a bogey flying in formation with the spacecraft. The Connor report continues. Especially puzzling is the first one of an object showing details such as arms protruding from a body having a noticeable angular extension. That's this McDivitt case. If the NORAD listing of objects near the Gemini 4 spacecraft at the time of the sighting is complete, as it presumably is, we shall have to find a rational explanation or, alternatively, keep it on our list of unidentifieds. That's a sweet picture, actually, of Ed White. He's the first American to be free of any spacecraft, so he let go, and he's got a little jetpack here. He can move himself around in space, and a little gold covering protects his face from the sun. Pretty cool photo there. So the Condon report even called it unidentified, and it's considered by pretty much all ufologists and several scientists as a deliberate attempt to debunk the UFO phenomenon. So in 1975, McDivitt added, I never made a big deal out of it. It was something I definitely couldn't identify. I reported it to the ground. Ed was asleep, and we were rotating at a pretty high rate in drifting flight. The windows were dirty, I recall. All of a sudden, there was this white object out there. It looked like a beer can with a pencil sticking out of it at an angle. It had a definite cylinder shape, about 3 times as long as its diameter. Maloney added that the astronaut estimated that he got a 30-second look at the object. Furthermore, McDivitt said the space agency made no attempt to prevent his telling his UFO story. A NORAD officer later handed the well-known debunker Class a print of the Titan II second stage. This, he told Class, was what McDivitt had seen but was unable to identify, the Titan boosters. He said it was the second stage, which would be this thing here. That's what he was unable to identify. But McDivitt replied, thank you for sending me the slide of the Gemini 4 photograph. I very quickly identified the object in the photograph as the second stage of the Titan rocket which launched us. I am sure that this is not a photograph of the object which I described many times and which many people refer to as the Gemini 4 UFO. McDivitt didn't see any special importance to what he saw. He didn't file the UFO report, and he's also always insisted that it was not the Titan II booster. He also never gave an opinion about what it was. Some researchers have noted that the astronaut's eyesight was affected by the long exposure to oxygen-saturated atmosphere in the Gemini capsule, but seems kind of amazing to me. They weren't up there that long. Mission was just 4 days, June 3 to June 7th. So almost everyone agrees that it could not have been a human satellite, such as a secret U.S. satellite or a Russian craft. Remember, this was in 1965. So what space debris up there is going to look like a long cylinder with a pencil sticking out of it. Interesting case. Let's move to the next one. If you didn't know, astronaut Buzz Aldrin actually recounted an Apollo 11 UFO encounter. There was something out there that was close enough to be observed. And what could it be? Mike Collins decided he thought he could see it in the telescope, and he was able to do that. And when it was in one position, that had a series of ellipses. But when you made it real sharp, it was sort of L-shaped. That didn't tell us very much. This is from July 18, 1969. That's astronaut Buzz Aldrin on the moon. Apollo 11 was the first man on the moon mission. Amazing mission. So they mentioned they wouldn't say anything about a UFO for fear of having to be turned around. This info was released in 2005 on the Science Channel, a program called First on the Moon, The Untold Story. There was a 3.5-minute segment that described this UFO encounter that Apollo 11 experienced during its flight to the moon. So 3 days and 200,000 miles into the flight, Apollo 11 crew asked this question: do you have any idea where the S4B is with respect to us? So the crew was asking information on the current position of the final stage of the rocket, which had been jettisoned away 2 days earlier. Buzz Aldrin mentions that later on they weren't going to ask, is there anything flying near us? Right? They didn't want to ask that question. Buzz Aldrin, there was something out there that was close enough to be observed, and what could it be? So traveling alongside of Apollo 11 was a mysterious object, like a ringed object. If it wasn't part of their own rocket, so it wasn't one of the stages, it could only be one thing, a UFO. Buzz Aldrin continues, Mike Collins decided he thought he could see it in the telescope, and he was able to do that. And when it was in one position that had a series of ellipses, but when you made it real sharp, it was sort of L-shaped. That didn't tell us very much. Despite having a clear view of the UFO, the crew were wary of reporting it to mission control. So Buzz Aldrin continues. Now, obviously, the three of us were not going to blur it out. Hey, Houston, we got something moving alongside of us, and we don't know what it is, Can you tell us what it is? We weren't about to do that, because we know that those transmissions would be heard by all sorts of people. And who knows what somebody would have demanded that we turn back because of aliens or whatever the reason is. So we didn't do that, but we did decide we just cautiously asked Houston how far away was the S4B. So Mission Control radioed the position back to Apollo 11. Apollo 11, Houston, S4B is about 6,000 nautical miles from you now. Over. Aldrin. A few moments later, they came back and said something like it was 6,000 miles away because of the maneuver. So we really didn't think we were looking at something that far away. So we decided that after a while of watching it, it was time to go to sleep, not to talk about it anymore until we came back and went through debriefing. So this is where they said we're just not going to talk about it anymore. To this day, whatever it was that the crew saw has never been positively identified or even officially acknowledged. Dr. David Baker was the Apollo 11 senior scientist. He says NASA knew very little about the object reported by the 11 crew. It was obviously an unidentified flying object, but such objects were not uncommon, and the history of even Earth orbit spaceflights going back over the previous years indicated that several crews saw objects. There were a lot of people within the program who went off later and became convinced that UFOs existed, and that led to some concern on NASA's part where they got the agreement of the crew never to publicly talk about these things for fear of ridicule. And that's what a lot of people have said. I get a lot of comments saying that NASA doesn't talk about this, and here you have a senior scientist from Apollo 11 saying that NASA's policy is for the crew never to publicly talk about these things for fear of ridicule. And we'll see now as we go to the Russian cosmonaut stories, they do the same thing. In April 1979, this man, cosmonaut Viktor Afanasyev, had a very interesting UFO encounter of being tailed basically through space as his spaceship was en route to the Soviet Salyut 6 space station. In April of 1979, cosmonaut Viktor Afanasyev lifted off from Star City to dock with the Soviet Salyut 6 space station. But while en route, something strange happened. He saw an unidentified object toward his craft and began tailing it through space. The cosmonaut said, "It followed us during half of our orbit. We observed it on the light side, and when we entered the shadow side, it disappeared completely. It was an engineering structure made from some type of metal, approximately 40 meters long with inner holes. The object was narrow here and wider here, and inside there were openings. Some places had projections like small wings. The object stayed very close to us. We photographed it, and our photos showed it to be 23 to 28 meters away." Wow, that's amazing. That is amazingly close. Look at this thing. So that's the cosmonaut's drawing of the UFO he witnessed. I could see how from different angles it would look like a flying saucer, right? It could easily look like a flying saucer if you're observing it from a little bit off axis here. And he said the photos showed it to be 23 to 28 meters away. That is amazing. Less than 100 feet. Extremely close. So we should have been able to see a lot of detail on this thing. So in addition to photographing the UFO, Afanasyev continually reported back to Mission Control about the craft's size, shape, and position. When the cosmonaut returned to Earth, he was debriefed and told never to reveal what he knew, and had his cameras and film confiscated. Those photos and his voice transmissions from space have never been released. So it's only now with the collapse of the Soviet Union that Afanasyev feels that he can safely tell his story. And he said it is still classified as a UFO because we have yet to identify the object. Okay, so that's an amazing story. And just like in the US, they said, look, you're not going to tell anyone about this. And the photos sent back to Mission Control were never released. And as we saw, McDivitt didn't even see the original photo that he took of the object. They sent him something else saying, no, here it is. This is what you saw. It was a reflection on the screen. And, oh, you probably saw the booster, right? The second stage booster. She said he surely would have recognized. Okay, the final case comes from this man. Man, look at that guy. Cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kovalyonok. What a picture, right? Major General. That is very high. So he saw a UFO while in orbit above the Salyut 6 space station. This happened May 5th, 1981. USSR hero Vladimir Kovalenok spent 217 days of his life living in space. When I was working at the Salyut orbital station, I saw something strange in a porthole one day. The object was the size of a finger. I was surprised to see it was an orbiting object. Okay, this information comes from International UFO Congress 2002. This is the cosmonaut speaking. Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke on such things. The encounter you asked me about happened on May 5th, 1981 at about 6 p.m. during the Salyut mission. At that time, we were over the area of South Africa, moving towards the area of the Indian Ocean. I just made some gymnastics exercises when I saw in front of me, through a porthole, an object which I could not explain. It is impossible to determine distances in space. A small object can appear large and far away and the other way around. Sometimes a cloud of dust appears like a large object. Anyway, I saw this object and then something happened I cannot explain. Something impossible according to the laws of physics. The object had this shape, elliptical, and flew with us. From a frontal view, it looked like it would rotate in flight direction. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened. Very beautiful to watch, of golden light. This was the first part. Then 1 or 2 seconds later, a second explosion followed somewhere else, and 2 spheres appeared, golden and very beautiful. After this explosion, I just saw white smoke, then a cloud-like sphere. Before we entered the darkness, we flew through the terminator, the twilight zone between day and night. We flew eastwards, and when we entered the darkness of the Earth's shadow, I could not see them any longer. The 2 spheres never returned. So another very interesting case from Cosmonaut. We have 2 astronauts, 2 cosmonauts there saying they see UFOs and actually took photos of them, sent the photos back, and heard nothing later on. Never got to see the photos again, and were basically told to not publicly bring this stuff up for fear of public ridicule. So is it just, people that can't believe it would be possible saying, hey, don't make us look like idiots? Do you think they're looking at something mundane? But how could it be mundane? 1965, there weren't any other satellites out there, right? Very few satellites. Something that large could have been another stage from a different rocket. Either way, you couldn't identify it. We have basically our smartest and best people going up, most credible. If you think military pilots are credible, what about astronauts and cosmonauts? I mean, this guy was a hero for the USSR. Is he really going to come out and say he saw a UFO up close, very clearly, and he just made it up? So amazing cases. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button. It really helps, and it's free. Consider subscribing to get future notifications of when I release videos. And you might like this video recommended by YouTube just for you. If you want to support the channel, join these great people over here, get exclusive bonus content, then click this button here, patreon.com/Chris Lehto, or become a YouTube member. If you want to continue the discussion, go to UAP Society Discord. Links are all in the description. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.